Cheese is older than the Roman Empire, older than written language in most civilizations, and older than the wheel. It was not invented by a scientist or a chef. It was discovered entirely by accident, and that single mistake changed the course of human history forever. For thousands of years, cheese has been one of the most traded, celebrated, and culturally significant foods in the world. Empires built supply chains around it. Monks spent their entire lives perfecting it. Wars were shaped by who controlled it. Yet most people have never heard the full story, from its accidental birth in the ancient Middle East to the complex, globally beloved varieties we enjoy today. That is exactly what we are going to uncover right now. The story of cheese begins approximately 8,000 to 10,000 years ago in what is now the Middle East and Central Asia. Around this same period, humans were first domesticating animals like sheep, goats, and cattle, which meant, for the first time in history, people had access to fresh milk in quantities that exceeded what they could immediately drink. The challenge was preservation, and the solution came entirely by accident. The leading theory among historians and food scientists is that early herders transported milk in pouches made from the dried stomach lining of young ruminant animals, a natural container that also happened to contain rennet, an enzyme that causes milk to curdle and separate into solid curds and liquid whey. After a day of travel under a warm sun, those early herders opened their pouches to find their milk had transformed into something firm, tangy, and surprisingly edible. They had created the world's first cheese entirely without meaning to. Archaeological evidence supports this narrative completely. The earliest confirmed cheese-making artifacts, ceramic cheese strainers with small perforated holes, were discovered in Poland and date back to approximately 5,500 BCE. Later evidence found in Egyptian tomb murals as old as 2000 BCE shows cheese being made and offered as a sacred food to the gods. An actual physical sample of ancient cheese was even recovered, clinging to the neck of a sealed clay jar inside an Egyptian tomb, making it one of the oldest solid food samples ever found by archaeologists anywhere on Earth. Once the process of cheese-making was understood, it spread rapidly across ancient civilizations. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia were among the first to document cheese production in writing, with cuneiform clay tablets describing over 20 distinct varieties of cheese being produced as far back as 3000 BCE. This tells us that within just a few thousand years of its accidental discovery, cheese had already become a sophisticated food with recognized varieties, distinct flavor profiles, and deep cultural significance. The ancient Greeks elevated cheese into something approaching a fine art. Greek mythology credited Aristaeus, son of Apollo, as the divine inventor of cheese-making, suggesting how deeply the craft had become embedded in cultural identity. Greek athletes were reportedly fed diets heavy in fresh goat cheese to build strength and endurance for competition. Cheese was also used as a form of currency in ancient trade, its long shelf life, making it an ideal commodity for long-distance commerce throughout the Mediterranean world. Rome, however, is where cheese-making transformed from a regional craft into an industrial enterprise. The Roman military ran on cheese. Every Roman legionnaire's daily field ration included approximately 1 pound of hard-aged cheese, making it arguably the most strategically important food in the entire empire. Roman writers, including Pliny the Elder, documented dozens of distinct varieties, classified by region, aging method, and flavor, in a level of detail that closely mirrors how modern food critics write about artisan cheese today. The Romans then spread cheese-making techniques across every territory they conquered, planting the seeds of what would eventually become France, Switzerland, England, and Italy's great cheese traditions. Before we continue, if you are finding this journey through cheese history as fascinating as we do, take a moment right now to hit the like button and subscribe to Origins of Cheese. We release a brand new deep dive episode every single week, and there is a lot more history still to uncover. Now, let's keep going. When the Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE, much of the sophisticated agricultural and culinary knowledge of the ancient world was at serious risk of disappearing. What saved European cheesemaking and many other crafts was the Catholic Church, and more specifically, its monasteries. Monks across France, Switzerland, Italy, and England became the primary keepers and innovators of cheesemaking for nearly 1,000 years through the medieval period. It was during this monastic era that many of the world's most iconic cheese varieties were born. Roquefort, still produced in the limestone caves of southern France today, traces its documented history back to 1070 CE. Brie, the creamy classic, was first recorded as a monastery cheese in the 8th century and was reportedly gifted to Charlemagne himself as a prized delicacy. Gruyère in Switzerland, Parmigiano Reggiano in northern Italy, and Cheddar in Somerset, England, all trace their formal origins to this same medieval monastic period, when monks had both the time and the institutional resources to experiment with long-aging processes, controlled cave environments, and jealously guarded recipes. The medieval trade routes of Europe then transformed cheese from a monastery staple into a global commodity. Merchants transported aged cheeses hundreds of miles overland and by sea, and specific regional varieties developed fierce reputations for exceptional quality. Roquefort was granted royal protection by a formal decree in 1411, making it one of the earliest examples in history of what we now call a protected designation of origin. In other words, hundreds of years before modern intellectual property law existed, cheese was already considered so valuable and so regionally specific that it required legal protection to preserve its identity. When European colonists arrived in North America in the early 1600s, cheese arrived with them. The Pilgrims aboard the Mayflower reportedly carried hard-aged cheese as part of their provisions for the crossing, one of the very few preserved foods capable of surviving the punishing months-long Atlantic voyage without spoiling. Cheesemaking quickly became a fundamental homestead skill across the American colonies, and by the 18th century, distinctly American regional cheese traditions were beginning to emerge. The real transformation of American cheese came in 1851 when Jesse Williams of New York opened the first cheese factory in the United States, permanently moving production out of the home and into an industrial setting. By the early 1900s, James Kraft had developed a method of pasteurizing and processing cheese into a fully shelf-stable product, creating one of the most commercially dominant and culturally debated cheeses in history. That invention, celebrated by some and criticized by traditionalists, would eventually make cheese one of the most consumed foods in the entire world. Today, the world produces over 22 million metric tons of cheese every single year. There are an estimated 1,800 distinct named varieties globally, though some cheese scholars argue the true number exceeds 2,000 when regional subvarieties are counted properly. France alone claims over 1,000 distinct cheeses, a figure famously referenced by Charles de Gaulle when he reportedly said, "How can anyone govern a nation with so many kinds of cheese?" A remark that, if anything, was a significant undercount of French cheesemaking ambition. Modern cheesemaking now sits at a fascinating intersection of ancient tradition and cutting-edge science. Researchers today use DNA analysis to trace the genetic lineage of specific bacterial cultures used in traditional cheeses back hundreds of years. The European Union's protected designation of origin system now legally protects over 200 distinct cheese varieties, meaning a cheese can only carry the name Parmigiano Reggiano, Roquefort, or Feta if it is produced in a specific geographic region using specific traditional methods. These protections are not simply about marketing. They are the active, living preservation of culinary history that stretches back through the monks, through the Romans, and all the way back to that anonymous herder in the ancient Middle East who opened a leather pouch one afternoon and found curds. The story of cheese is ultimately the story of human ingenuity and adaptability across thousands of years. It is a food born from pure necessity, perfected through centuries of careful observation and experimentation, preserved by determined monks through the darkest ages of history, carried across entire oceans by pioneers, and celebrated today as one of the most complex and culturally rich foods ever produced. From that first accidental curdled pouch on a sun-baked hillside 8,000 years ago to the 22 million metric tons produced every single year today, cheese has traveled further and meant more to human civilization than almost any other food in recorded history. 8,000 years of history, an accidental discovery, empires built on a curdled leather pouch, and over 1,800 varieties that still carry that ancient story in every single bite. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the untold history of cheese, please hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel grow and allows us to keep making content like this every week. Subscribe to Origins of Cheese so you never miss our next episode. And drop a comment below. We want to know, what is your all-time favorite cheese, and did you know its history before watching today? We read every single comment. See you in the next one.